Hey, it's James Lynch. So I haven't had a chance to talk about the Sean Strickland and Khamzat Chimaev sort of build up to their fight. And if you've watched videos on this channel before, I've talked about how this is a true rivalry. These two do not like each other and it's a very good fight. But I'm starting to get a bit worried now with some of the stuff we're seeing leading up to the fight that something could happen. Not that anyone's going to get like seriously hurt or anything like that, but like something weird could happen during fight week. And maybe this fight's in jeopardy. I'm honestly at that point right now with some of the stuff that's going on. So let's start at the beginning here. Sean Strickland does a media scrum in Vegas with a select number of media. You guys can read what's on the screen here. I'm not going to repeat it. Strickland's, he's trying to say edgy stuff to obviously, get a rise out of Chimaev, get a rise out of the fans. I know what he's doing here. I don't think this is the right way to sell the fight. I think there's a lot of other things you could go after Chimaev for that could still build up this fight that's not going to be crossing the line. Again, you can see it on the screen here. I'm not going to repeat it, but you could talk about the fact that he had COVID. You could talk about the fact that he hasn't been that active. I think there's a way to build up this fight, and I don't think Strickland's doing it the right way. And that's kind of the way Strickland's been doing things, is really pushing things to the edge. And it's not like you're going to have the UFC step in and say, oh, you can't do this. I mean, the closest we've had was after Strickland's last fight when he started going off about one of the coaches dating a student of his. They cut his mic off. That's the closest we've had to Strickland being sort of censored. Remember back at UFC 297, Dana got kind of defensive when he was asked about, are you going to punish Strickland for his comments? So we sort of knew this was going to happen because Strickland's trying to push the envelope. And listen, I'm not against obviously free speech or anything like that, but you're reading this right here. People are going to get upset. They're going to get offended by it. I give, some of the Muslim fans in MMA a little bit of grief because they get a little bit too sensitive about fighters not picking them when it comes to fights and stuff. But this stuff's valid. And people have a right to be upset by some of the stuff that he's saying here. So this is where things started. And then, of course, there was the big quote that I saw go viral on X. Sean Strickland says he'd shoot Khamzat Chimaev if he tries to jump him. Now, this is a bit misleading because if you see Strickland where he's actually doing the quote, he's kind of laughing about it after. I mean, I wouldn't put it past Strickland doing this, but also, and he does shoot guns, obviously. It was kind of done in a joking manner, so it's not completely the right context here. Right, if you're just reading this would sound like someone who's angry and going to do it, but he was kind of doing it in a joking manner. But this was all over X, and obviously Chimaev saw this. He did his own media scrum with Jackson, and he says, calls him a clown, mocks him, says he didn't shoot any chickens, all this stuff. So Chimaev's just like totally stoic. Chimaev hasn't really been barking back. The only issue I'll say here is you're not dealing with an average fighter here. You're dealing with Chimaev, who, as we know, has ties to Kadyrov. Kadyrov's a pretty bad guy. I don't need to give you a history lesson on that. Do a quick Google search. Chimaev runs in a big crew here. I'm a bit concerned with that. And then we have this tweet today, which kind of was the reason I wanted to do this video, because it kind of all ties it together. We'll read it here from Strickland. He says, the UFC is trying to limit my interactions with the dog, referring to Chimaev. Listen, I will say this now, will not be controlled by a third world dog. If I find there is unequal treatment between our camps, I will walk to the lobby and wait for him. Control your you-know-what or don't. I don't care. Let the chips fall where they may. This is America. So I understand Strickland wanting fair treatment going into this one. But this is we're kind of getting to the point of what we had a couple of years ago with Khabib and Conor, right? I mean, you know what happened with that? I mean, obviously the fight itself ended up in, Khabib jumping in the cage. But going back even further than that, there was the whole Dolly incident, right, in Brooklyn, where Khabib was supposed to fight. It was initially Ferguson, then Holloway, then it ended up being Iaquinta. But remember, there was the whole Dolly thing, and Conor flying to New York and trying to get at Khabib and all that. We're kind of getting to that level where like, I could see stuff happening outside the cage, and nobody wants that because, again, the UFC just got this Paramount deal. They got to be really careful about this stuff. And I know there's going to be people in the comments saying, oh, being too soft or whatever. Like, listen, I was in Brooklyn when that whole thing happened with Khabib and Conor. I'm kind of getting the same vibe here. And listen, I don't blame Strickland for wanting to be, kind of censored or not censored, but just like them not doing like a face-off and all that. I get that. I just think the UFC has to be really careful about this. And Ariel Helwani talked about this on his show this week, about how they really need to beef up security for this. Like, that would be my number one priority. Listen, I love this fight. I love the build up to it. I think it's going to be good. I think we're getting to a point now where it's getting a bit concerning. Like, this is not what I wanted. I think there was a way you could have built up this fight without it having to get to this level. Again, not on Chimaev's end. I'm talking more on Strickland's end here. He's pushing the envelope a little bit too much, and I understand why he's doing it, because UFC is not coming down and saying you can't do this. I guess to a certain degree they are when they're talking here about like his interactions and all that, but UFC's got to be really careful about this, in my opinion. Beef up security. I think you could still have them do something like a press conference or You could potentially do a face-off, but you got to make sure that there's like, you know, put all your money into security here and make sure that it can happen in a very safe manner, because you don't want anything to happen. Like, I could even see a situation where like people from Chimaev's camp start fighting with people from Strickland's camp or something like that. I could see that happening, and you don't want that. You obviously want attention on this fight. You want to build up. Like I said, one of the reasons I wanted to see this fight was because of the fact that these are two people who legit don't like each other, and that in itself is selling this fight. Because if we're looking at the odds right now, Chimaev should win this fight, right? I mean, you're looking at the odds, Chimaev should win this, but when you have this little added extra bit of like the fact that you got two guys that don't like each other, it really adds a lot more, right? It reminds me, I mean, we've had tons of fights like this where the buildup was maybe more impressive than the fight itself, right? I mentioned Khabib and Conor. You've got Masvidal and Colby. You had Usman and Colby. Like, these were all, fights where the two fighters did not like each other. And a lot of those examples I just brought up there were some things that were crossed the line for sure with some of the things that were said. I don't need to go back and revisit examples, but that obviously got more interest in the fight when stuff like that's going on, when you got two fighters who don't like each other. So I'm kind of doing this video to say, like, I am a bit concerned. I hope the UFC is really taking this seriously, and I hope they're not just looking at this and, again, obviously they're limiting the interaction, so they are, but I really think security's got to be, number one priority here. And you just had to deal with Paramount. You got to be really careful about this. So we'll see how this kind of unfolds. If we read some of the comments here on Strickland's post, Sean is never one to hold back. This fight weekend is getting intense already. So obviously there's going to be more buildup here. But again, UFC's got to do it in a proper way. The fight will be me in handcuffs. That's what I'm saying. He's saying the fight week will be me in handcuffs. Nobody wants that. We want to see this fight happen, especially with the fact that the division, we'd like to see it moved on a little bit more. I don't like what I'm reading right here from Strickland. And I don't think Strickland's afraid of Chimaev. I know there'll be some people saying that. I just think he's one of these guys who doesn't like being disrespected, but he kind of started it, right? Like, he started with some of the comments that were obviously over the line. I don't like what Strickland's saying here. So UFC's got to get to him. His management's got to get to him. They got to really zone Sean in on the fact that this might be his last opportunity at a title shot. In fact, I think it probably will be, right? Like, don't mess this up. This is a great opportunity for like I said, a heated rivalry between these two. We want the fight to actually happen. So he's obviously pushing back. Dana was telling the media that he's scared shitless because he's afraid of the face-off. I mean, but I don't blame him. But I still think you could do the face-off. Just hire a bunch of security to do it. You're an embarrassment to every American. So not everyone's on Strickland's side here. Real Americans don't act like you. They show respect to all people, including their opponents. I mean, I think you could still sell this fight and push the envelope a bit, but you don't have to say some of the stuff that he's saying. Of course, we got the fans upset. And I don't blame Chimaev fans for being upset with Strickland with some of the stuff he said. Like I said, I think there's stuff that people get upset about. I think there's legitimate, reason to be upset with Strickland right now. Again, we're getting some really crazy stuff here. He will little manhandle you. So yeah, so you can see here a lot of the Chimaev fans coming after him. I always love the we are 10 days away, as if you're somehow part of Chimaev's camp here. So this is what I mean. Like, you're getting a mix of comments here, but mostly people, kind of going after Strickland, which makes sense. Again, Chimaev's got a huge fan base here. But yeah, like I said, I'm doing this video because I want this fight to happen. Again, it's very rare we have two fighters who don't like each other. I just hope it takes place. UFC, if you're watching this, please do everything you can to make sure this actually takes place, because I'm a bit concerned now just with some of the stuff here, right? Like, if Strickland's speaking out like this and he feels like he's going to, try and prove himself and show up against Khamzat, like, I don't want something to happen here. I don't want the fight to be in jeopardy. I don't want these guys to get in a brawl and there's an injury and the fight can't happen. Like, nobody wants that. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the situation right now. I'm starting to get a bit concerned. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you make of everything that's going on? Let me know your entire thoughts on the situation. I think the fight will happen, but like, they got to really be keeping an eye on this stuff. And I'm sure they are. I mean, there was that episode of Fight Inc., I think it was a couple years ago, where they had a meeting about some of the stuff that Strickland said. Like, obviously they're aware of it, but I don't know. It's getting a little bit ugly at this point. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.